most of you or many of you would know, Symantec happens to be the largest company in the business of protecting digital information in all forms. And so what that does is it gives us a very unique perspective on the security landscape, right? What's going on with the threat landscape, what's changing in the environments, because a lot of our security challenges are to do with the fact that our environments don't stay the same, right? The technology landscape keeps changing, and also the environment in which our customers, all of you operate, actually keeps evolving as well. So what I'm going to do is try to give you a little high-level perspective on what we are seeing when we talk to our customers, what are we seeing when we talk to different governments in the world, and what are we seeing when we talk to individual consumers across the globe. So just to start off, what I wanted to do was, just throw up this, because when we talk about information security in general, we still in our mind visualize laptops and desktops. And when we think of hacks, I mean, that is essentially where we think most of the hacks are happening. But the reality is that computers actually come in various forms. I mean, they are disguised all around us. And so when we talk about information security, you have to remember that desktops and laptops are no longer the only devices through which attacks can actually happen. So to answer the question that has been put up there, all of these three kinds of devices, which is basically, the one that may surprise some of you, unless you have read the news reports, is the trash can probably. But the smart television, for example, today, if you were to buy a large high-end television, there is no way you can buy a traditional, what I used to term as a dumb television, right, where you just switch it on to watch stuff. Most of them are internet connected, internet enabled. They have applications running on it. In fact, I don't think you can buy a high-end television which does not have that capability today. And all of these have been hacked or demonstrated as being hackable. So the smart TV is one. Baby monitor, there was actually a real attack that had happened. In this case, parents in Texas discovered voices coming in from their baby monitor, which they had actually put to monitor their little child. And they realized that there was somebody at the other end of it, obviously, who, an unwanted intruder who was using the camera and the audio to essentially, communicate with their kid. And the trash can was an interesting one. There was a company in London only a few months back that decided to actually put these smart trash cans, which would have advertisements showing up on the side. But the interesting thing was that they were also tracking Wi-Fi signals from passing mobile phones as people passed by. And they were able to actually identify how people's movements in the streets. That is what they were trying to do. Essentially try to do the same thing that a cookie, for example, does on a website, but then cookie the streets of London, so to say. Now, after it created a big outcry, the courts intervened and the system was actually taken off. But what this demonstrates is that actually when we talk about hackers and when we talk about cyber crime and attacks, they no longer involve traditional, desktops, laptops, and the things that we used to think of when we think of computer crime. They can happen through a lot of smart devices, and smart devices are not something that you think are in the future. A lot of that is actually already there in our homes and around us. So what are we seeing in general? I mean, if you look at the threat landscape, the way it's been evolving is, we started off by hacking. Obviously, we still use this term very widely, but the earlier generation of hackers, as you know, were very individual kind of people who essentially did everything right from being a technical geek, figuring out how to exploit vulnerabilities and actually, doing the attack themselves. And moved on to more organized ways of doing things. So if you look at cybercrime in recent times, there are no more of those individual types, even though one can argue that there are still hacktivist kind of communities which may have a few of that, but even they are increasingly more organized. So it's become more organized crime. These are usually people who have a very clear-cut agenda. The initial hackers used to, by and large, be motivated by fame and by by wanting to actually show that they could do it more than anything else. So a lot of the earlier hackers, you will notice, they did not actually do it because they wanted to make financial gain out of it. it was all done to get an ego boost or just to showcase that they could actually do it, or I mean, essentially they were like the graffiti writers of the IT age. Today, most of them are organized. There is a lot of specialization that goes in, and by and large, cybercrime is motivated either by financial gains, political gains, or some other kind of clear motive. Beyond that, of course, it's not only the criminals who have gotten into the act, nation states and those with political motives, and this could be non-political actors as well. They are heavily leveraging the internet and IT in general to be able to conduct the same kind of activities that they were conducting in the real world, which means anybody who was actually involved in espionage, whether of the industrial variety or of the political variety, all of them are leveraging cyber assets to be able to do so today. In fact, predominantly so. So that's a huge thing. These guys obviously are heavily funded in most cases because some of them have good amount of state backing, so they are not short of funds. And that shows up in the kind of attacks and sophistication that you actually see behind some of the attacks that have actually happened in the last few years. And finally, cyber warfare. Because you not only can attack people's computers, but through cyber warfare, you can actually use computers in a way which can actually cause real-world havoc. You could cause explosions, you could cause massive real-world problems, which I can illustrate later as I talk about how industrial controls and SCADA systems, etc., can be actually, leveraged by the bad guys or politically motivated guys to actually launch attacks on a different country or a political entity. So that's how the whole landscape has been evolving, and it continues. So when I say that it is evolving, that doesn't mean that the earlier kind of hackers, etc., were are no longer there. All of these communities now coexist, but the level of sophistication has actually increased. So the other thing that I wanted to, and this won't surprise anybody, I guess, is that there is a huge amount of growth in sophisticated attacks. And you have heard the term APTS. Probably anybody who's been reading or has been in security for a while would have heard the term APT. I mean, last year probably was the year of APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. Now, many say that that term is probably a very simplistic way. There is, but no matter what it basically tries to talk about is that, look, the newer threats are advanced. The A stands for advanced, which means the level of sophistication is very high. And many well-funded groups which have recently conducted attacks have used several more zero-day vulnerabilities as an example than have ever been done in the past. So last year when we looked at attacks, I mean the number of zero-day vulnerabilities that were leveraged to conduct those attacks were far higher than the preceding year. Persistent usually means that unlike cybercrime of the past where people would cast a phishing net, so when you sent out malware, you would quickly try to figure out what did you lay your hands on and make off with that, right? Whether it was credit card details, bank account numbers, whatever it was. You quickly conducted an attack and tried to make off with as much of assets that you could actually steal. But today's sophisticated attackers are not looking for a short-term reward. They are willing to persist and stay on. So in many of the awards, and some of the speakers who spoke before, they mentioned attacks on the retail networks in the US, for example. I mean, there were two big retailers who were recently attacked. And you will notice that in most of these cases, it was found that those attacks actually happened over a period of time. In at least one case, it's very clear that the attackers actually breached their IT systems, the retailer's IT systems, almost 6 months before actually it became public. In many times, what that means is the attackers have patience. They are willing to stay on. They enter into a system and then stay within the network hidden until they get their hands on the crown jewels, the bigger reward that they're after, rather than trying to do a quick thing. So unlike the opportunistic burglars, these guys are sophisticated criminals who want to, take the time, launch attack over a period of time, and they have the patience to be able to stay on and pull off those attacks. Look at the amount of identity theft that has happened. I mean, this is a big one. I mean, so the amount of identities exposed just in the past 1 year actually exceeds the population of Germany. And there are a whole bunch of unpatched vulnerabilities. I mean, this is an old problem, right? I mean, and the issue is pretty clear because at one level, we think of security as being aware of all the various ways in which criminals can get to us. But the reality is that modern IT systems are so complex and sophisticated that even if you knew of the vulnerabilities, most companies and governments actually grapple with the fact on how do they take care of it, how do they remediate vulnerabilities in their systems even after they know about it. From the time that you know about a vulnerability, it takes companies anywhere between a few months to almost 6 months to actually patch their systems to be able to close them because it's a complex environment, right? I mean, you can't quickly patch things because you have to test all of the applications. You know, all of your business critical applications have to keep running all through this stage, right? So people sometimes run at a higher degree of risk, even though they know that there are potential areas that actually could be exploited. And that's the challenge, actually, balancing between knowing what you have to secure and figuring out a meaningful, reasonable way in which you can actually quickly close those vulnerabilities and pathways into your systems and information in a reasonable manner in a reasonable cost. And additionally, what we have seen, I mean, recently is that there has been a great degree of focus on attacks on critical infrastructure. Now, in most of these cases, these attacks have some political motive in general. I mean, in the past, there have been several of them. I mean, the most high-profile one that I used to talk about earlier was the Stuxnet attack, which was conducted. It was pretty clear that the target was Iran's nuclear installation. But if you look at the kind of attack that it was, I mean, that clearly illustrated what security researchers have been talking about for a while, right? That industrial control systems are vulnerable to attacks. But that was a demonstration of the damage that you can really do if a nation state actually took it upon themselves to actually launch an attack in a meaningful way on somebody else's infrastructure. Because what that did was hunt out a very specific organization, get onto industrial controllers which were of a very specific kind, and launch an attack that actually caused destruction in the real world, right? In this case, it destroyed probably centrifuges, but one could use these kind of techniques to actually launch an attack where you could bring down a telecom network of an entire nation, or even affect the gas pipelines causing explosion. In fact, in the Eastern European world, in the last decade, there was at least one very large explosion that was suspected to have been caused through cyber attack means. So this has happened. And the other thing I'll want to point out when I talk about this is that when you think of attacks on infrastructure or cyber attacks in general with a political motive, we always tend to think that the victims or the countries that are targeted are in the Western world. But that's not really true. I mean, you'll notice that attacks happen between all kinds of politically motivated players. So, for example, Russia's largest oil company was also a target of a cyber attack at one time. And so there are very many of these stuff that has happened. There have been electric grids that have been under attack. There have been nuclear programs that have been under attack, and a lot of sophisticated malware that we actually have seen that have been brought to the fore. So for Stuxnet I talked about, and Stuxnet, for those security researchers who have looked at, who have tried to reverse engineer Stuxnet, I mean, that has been probably one of the most sophisticated malware ever seen. I mean, I know that Symantec spent a lot of time actually focused on that. And the way we used to actually illustrate how sophisticated it was is, if you look at the typical malware as IED explosive or the regular explosive that terrorists use on the roadside, then this would be a cruise missile. Both in terms of the sophistication that went in, when we analyzed it, we clearly knew that this was not a group of a dozen people who had developed it. There were probably large teams involved in it. There were great many zero-day vulnerabilities used in this, used to launch this attack. And the other interesting thing was that it was very, very targeted. So that's the other analogy I gave with cruise missile. Unless a regular explosive which can explode in the face of other people without knowing whether its target is the right one, this one actually would not launch its payload until it actually validated that the target was the one that it was going after. So, so Stuxnet, when this attack was introduced, it actually infected computers in a number of different places. In fact, India was among the top 3 countries which saw Stuxnet infections. But because the payload was not launched on any of the India systems, that did not become an issue in this country. But that was the nature of the malware that was that was launched then. And Duku was another one where we realized that the same group that was behind Stuxnet probably had access to the same source code and modified it to launch a different kind of attack. So Duku was an attack which was again seen in the wild. And what that malware essentially did was tried to look for IP. It was mostly used as a means of stealing design documents, stealing things, but again with a bent on manufacturing and industrial systems. And there were many such attacks. I mean, I'll just talk about a couple of them very briefly. I mean, hidden links was another interesting one. So this is a very sophisticated group. They still operate, but this over the last decade, we have noticed that this is like a private army that somebody can hire, and these guys are really, really sophisticated. So this is like, and within hidden links itself, I mean, what we find is that they have segmented their groups in a way where they have a general group of people and tools that they launch for their most common stuff, and then there is a group of commandos, so to say, who actually use a very high level of sophistication to go and go after different things. And the amount of sophistication they have and the scale they have also shows in the fact that they have in the past gone after multiple high-value targets at the same time. So they have the capability to do that. So there are a number of these things which are happening, and these seem to have some kind of political agenda behind them, and most of them go after a nation's key assets. And like I said, there are even mercenary groups involved, which means that they are making money by serving the agenda of various political players. And finally, I want to point out that while we always, as a group, I mean, if you look at how security has evolved, we have always focused on protecting the endpoints, right, in the past, because that is what we used to do. I mean, put our, at all of the edges of our networks and at the edges of our computing world, we tried to protect things, because that was sort of like how in the physical world we always protected ourselves. We would build a fort, right, in the past. So when we wanted to protect a kingdom, usually they would put up a fort or a moat and assume that, hey, all the bad things can be stopped at the perimeter, and all of us good guys are going to be within. Now, that was the same logic through which security evolved in the IT world as well. So what you did is you built firewalls, you put antivirus on all of the endpoint devices so you could guard the perimeters of your organization. But the reality is that today's IT world is so sophisticated and so complex that you need a layered approach to security. And when you look at attacks that are conducted by criminals or anybody to get to your assets, those assets always lie in an organization's data center. And therefore, one of the things that actually has been a focus area for us has been, how do you have a layered approach to security where you can augment all of the stuff that you do at the perimeter with the last line of defense, which is closer to the assets that the bad guys are really after and the ones that you really want to protect. Because the data center essentially has all the critical applications and the data that you really want to protect and the bad guys want to go after. So that's been a big focus area. So while endpoints and desktops are hacked, it's usually as a pathway into those assets. And that's the place that we see increasing focus on, both from the bad guys as well as from the security community. So overall, I mean, if you look at the cyber criminals, I mean, why do you think that they are being so successful? So we believe that they are being successful because they are doing exactly the kind of things that we should be doing, which is They are sharing information really well. So they operate through several forums. So a lot of them, including the groups which are loosely coupled, you will notice that they may not know each other well personally, but they have a very good system of actually interfacing with each other, and they have forums and communities through which they can share information. So they don't try to reinvent the wheel. They are able to leverage on each other's specialist talents to be able to do things. They also adopt technology really fast. So as a combination of these two things, what is happening is that you will notice that people build on other people's expertise, and they also have begun to specialize, which means that, hey, there are technology experts, there are people who know how to, do social, social manipulation to conduct attacks, etc. And the third thing is that they are now much better funded than they were before. It is no longer somebody using his pocket money or his own personal expenses, to pay for attacks. I mean, there are, big bucks, and now as the motives behind attacks have actually become financial and political. So there are big bucks behind it, which means that they have access to the best tools and the best people, just like the good guys do. Now, just to go over, how attacks are usually conducted. Given that our attackers are so sophisticated, you will notice that they no longer have a very sketchy way in which they conduct attacks. There are actually a very clear-cut process that attackers usually go through when they conduct attacks. The first part is what we call reconnaissance, and this is basically understanding who your targets are. So unlike in the past, where most of the attacks were conducted on random people, nowadays, a bulk of attacks, bulk of the sophisticated attacks, the high-profile attacks are those which target clearly. So what they do is they spend a lot of time initially researching their target. And researching the target could mean not only researching the companies and the weaknesses in their IT systems and networks, but also researching their key people. Now, this could be people both at the senior executive level to see how they can actually be compromised, or how they can be, attacked through in a manner where they can be used as a conduit into the information that they can access. But many a time, it can also happen by researching people way down in the organization. These guys, people at the, the assistant, the secretaries, HR people. There have been a number of high-profile cases where breaches happened at that level. And like somebody pointed out just now, breaches can happen by also understanding supply chains really well. Because as you know, no company nowadays builds things in isolation. You have vendors to do that for you. You yourself may be providing services to another vendor. So when you want to hack company A, you don't always need to go through company A. If company A is using outsourced services from company B, which has accesses and privileges into their IT systems, you could probably be able to launch an attack from those. And incidentally, we have actually seen signs of that. So for example, in India, in the Indian context, we suddenly saw a lot of cyber attack activity happening in smaller cities. Now that looked interesting until we realized that some of these smaller cities like Ludhiana, like Pondicherry, like, so some of these small places were also hubs of a lot of, small and medium industries which were selling to larger companies in the Western world. And what we realized is that they are being many a times used as conduits to actually get into those systems. Because the bigger companies have started spending a lot of attention and money in securing their IT systems, but some of the smaller companies may not have actually put as much focus. So the idea was, can you attack them and through them get access into some of the other companies to which they actually have access to? So that is a big thing. So the research phase actually is one where today's cyber criminal spends a considerable amount of time. And the next one is, of course, gaining access. Now, that is the one that all of us actually know pretty well, because we think of, the whole hacking process as one in which you basically launch a malware and get into somebody's system. But that is only part of a five-step process, like I said. So next you gain access. After you have researched, you try to gain access, either by a phishing attack or some kind of a social con job on some of the execs or somebody in the organization. You penetrate and basically get your malware in place. But then, after you have gained access, what you do is you basically sit quietly and first spend a lot of time trying to make a map of all the assets. So now you're within the place. So it's like a Trojan horse. You have got inside the fortress, but instead of making yourself visible immediately, you stay hidden and use the time to basically figure out where are the big assets, where are the other weaknesses, and where are the big things that you really want to go after. And after you have done the discovery phase, you go to the capture phase, which is basically you figure out how do you actually get the crown jewels you are after. So for example, for the retail chain, in that case, it was where they had stored all those card numbers and the details of everybody who swiped cards in those retail shops, right? So that is what they took. And finally is exfiltration. Now that is an important process too, because when you are stealing a lot of data, how do you quietly pull that data off the network into your, into wherever your servers are, and do it in a manner where the security products or security personnel in that company cannot actually detect your presence. So they spend a lot of time in being able to take out all of those assets from your organization in a manner where they don't get caught quickly. So these are the different steps that most sophisticated attacks follow. Now, depending on the level of sophistication, we have seen a lot of time being spent on certain parts of this process than others. But in general, I mean, most of these attacks actually involve these parts of the process. So even as the bad guys are getting sophisticated, organized, well-funded, there is another thing that is happening which is actually leading to the growth of cybercrime in the world and the amount of loss that in the world through cybercrime. And that is the growth of digital information. Now, if you look at the way digital information is growing, it's actually pretty phenomenal. In fact, if you just extrapolate this, in a few years, storage guys will not be able to keep up, storage vendors will not be able to keep up with the amount of demand for storage for the digital information that exists. And this is not only true in, for enterprise information, but even in our personal lives. I mean, if you look at the amount of stuff that you now want to store on your own personal computers, I mean, you seem to be running out of space almost every year or so, right? You have to attach external drives, you are constantly upgrading your systems, not only because you need more compute power, but also because your storage that just when you bought your computer looked phenomenally large, suddenly looks small again. And that's because you have put more and more stuff on those computers, and everything that is important in this world is now digitized, right, in some form or the other. So that's the big problem that our customers are grappling with. That not only are the bad guys getting sophisticated, but the amount of information that you have to protect today is much, much larger than what you had to protect yesterday. And how do you basically solve that problem given that you have so much to do? So in general, I mean, when you look at the world around you, when I talk to companies and governments around the world, I think the biggest realization is that as you expand your boundaries, as you try to leverage new technologies, as you try to actually be more productive and deliver new and interesting kinds of products and services, the expanding horizons actually create more risk for you. And these risks are not only because of the kind of external people who could potentially be interested in actually stealing stuff that you are producing, and that could be not only these hackers and the criminals, but they could also a lot of the damage sometimes is done by also well-meaning insiders and just malicious insiders, because a lot of company attacks sometimes start because somebody is disgruntled within the company or somebody just made a mistake. There is some person who was careless and probably leaked out information unknowingly. But those kind of issues need to be tackled too, right? So you need to have systems in place. Your security systems need to be capable of taking care of even well-meaning mistakes that can actually cause damage to intellectual property and systems. So that's one kind of thing, but also environmental factors. What that means is as more of these attacks are becoming high profile, governments around the world are setting higher regulation standards for companies to adhere to, which means even if you think you are secure, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are secure, without which it may be a criminal offense that may actually cost you a lot. if somebody takes you to court. I mean, this is a big deal for a lot of companies in the Western world and is also becoming a big deal for companies in India and in the Asian region. And finally, how do you adopt newer technologies? Because companies and individuals want to constantly become more productive by adopting the latest technologies. And everything around us is evolving at a rapid pace. At the endpoints, I mean, it's all about a mobile device, and it's not only about a mobile device like in the past, but you have multiple devices that you want to use simultaneously. Your home is becoming like an IT network with a Wi-Fi router, with your television talking to your media system on the computer. I mean, you have a small IT network at home. How do you make sure that your own personal assets are secure? And at a company level, the data center, which contained all your assets, itself is no longer a rack that is locked in somewhere in your IT organization. It's also evolving. It's virtualizing, and now there are, your data center is a hybrid of assets that are within your own systems and within public clouds somewhere else in the world. So that's the kind of, in that kind of a world, how do you make sure that you can continue to move forward without bothering about the additional risk that you're, facing? So that's the kind of problem our customers are dealing with. More sophisticated criminals, new technology that you want to pick up, but you're being impeded because of the risk, and new regulatory norms that governments and governments are imposing on you. So coming back, I mean, from where I started, on top of it, I mean, there are a lot of stuff happening on the Internet of Things. So while today's attacks predominantly have been conducted on traditional computing environments, you will notice just because there are going to be so many devices which are connected and smart, tomorrow's attacks are probably going to predominantly happen here. In fact, the US retailer that got hacked recently, you will notice that a malware was dropped into the point-of-sale terminal, which is honestly a special-purpose device. I mean, it's not a general-purpose computing device. So a point-of-sale terminal, an ATM machine, a printer that may be in your home and actually allows you to actually send it documents over the Internet, all of this are vulnerable to attacks. Because once you can do something over a connected line, I mean, potentially there is somebody who can hack it. In fact, I don't know how many of you actually saw this article 2 days back. I just was seeing a security researcher point out that they were able to get their hands on a X-ray machine that you see used in all of the airports. Now, I used to always wonder how this, the X-ray machine, when you actually scan them, how do you make sure that the guys who look at those monitors actually are doing their job? Now, it turns out that apparently they have a mode in which their supervisor at the back can superimpose an image of a gun or a weapon or some kind of a contraband randomly just to test whether their operators are able to find it. So what that means is that through their system, there is a way by which you can actually superimpose something on the real image of the bag that is passing through the X-ray machine. Now, obviously, what happens is if you are able to hack into that kind of a system, you could do something in reverse as well. If there is a real gun which is passing in the bag, you could potentially hack it to cover it up with some other piece of image so that the guy never sees it. And so that was actually an interesting find that got published just a couple of days back. And so this is the kind of stuff that can happen. I mean, remember that nobody thinks of an X-ray machine as something that potentially can be involved in cyber crime. So there are a lot of stuff that you today do not think of. We are in talks with several car manufacturers in the US, for example, because you may not know, but a lot of the cars even today have onboard computers. Now, a lot of them have been demonstrated as relatively easy to hack into. And, you could, for example, suddenly engage the braking system. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff, with cars as well. So one of the things that I believe is going to be big in this coming, couple of years is the Internet of Things. Because in addition to all of the stuff that's going on in the traditional computing world, this is going to change a lot of things. So just to summarize, the big challenge ahead of us is that the attacks have gotten sophisticated. our user community, the bulk of the people are also getting challenged with not having enough skills and expertise with which to deal with these attacks. Because security experts are not easy to get. It's not easy to train people. Even in India, you must have seen an article which said that there was a company which did this for the government and came out with a large figure saying that, hey, we need hundreds of thousands of security professionals to actually safeguard everything that is critical in the country. So that was scary, actually. So there is an expertise problem as well. And heterogeneous infrastructure, meaning our IT systems are getting more and more complex. In the past, one operating system used to have monopoly. So even though you can argue that it was not the most secure operating system, the reality was that you could actually focus on one thing to protect. But today, because you use heterogeneous infrastructure in the mobile world, for example, there is no one clear leader. You have to have an ability to actually safeguard your infrastructure in number of different ways, number of platforms, number of vendors, etc. And the cost of incidents have risen simply because the value of the assets that are getting stolen are so high. And finally, information explosion, like I pointed out. You just have more things to secure. So this is the entirety of the problem that people are trying to actually solve. So what do we need to do? So this is just a broad perspective that I have on how we need to approach problems, because the problem looks really big and overwhelming, right? But my belief is that we need to approach it smartly. One of the first things that we always recommend to people is that look at it in a risk-based approach. Don't try to solve every problem with the same level of focus. So use a risk-based approach so that you know what is most critical for you, what is less critical for you, and focus on the things that really matter most. So when you look at risk, you will obviously have to identify not only what is more important to you, but also figure out what are the chances that somebody else is going to actually want to go after that assets. And based on a combination of those, figure out your funding and focus for those things. Continue to focus on keeping the bad guys out. Now, this is something that most companies with basic security always do, that they have been focused on, hey, how do we get at least the bare minimum security in place to keep the bad guys out? And you have to continue to focus on it. And the third one is, how do you minimize impact of a cyber security event? Which means that even though you are protected, even though you are investing in security, you should always assume that you are going to get attacked. And remember that everybody gets attacked. It just depends on how motivated the attacker is and how much time they're willing to spend. Remember that security companies themselves get attacked too. You have seen several incidents in the past, right? So nobody is invulnerable to attacks. Attacks will happen. So you have to keep yourself protected. You have to use a risk-based mechanism, to figure out where you want to focus more. But you also want to assume that you will get attacked. And when you do get attacked, how can you actually quickly, reduce the damage that can be done? That is important. How quickly can you respond? Remember that today, companies, even after they get attacked, it takes them a long time sometimes to actually even reduce, limit the damage or, take out the malware from that system and clean up their systems. You need to get more smarter on how you do that faster. So those are some of the aspects. I mean, you need to be able to respond and, recover from those attacks pretty rapidly. And finally, at a high level, I believe that, what we require to do is something that the bad guys have been also doing, which is we need to collaborate more. And we have, the good news is that there is increasing amount of private-public collaboration, and we see this with governments, not only in the, we obviously get called in with a lot of different governments. I mean, we are involved both with, the Indian government, for example, with Western governments. And so there is a lot of collaboration that's happening, which is multilateral. So there are multiple security vendors, user communities, and governments which are getting together to actually not only create security postures, but actually work together on figuring out how to solve problems of the future. The second one is security intelligence. This is hugely important. And this is one of the areas which is going to be the big differentiator, which is how do you correlate things that are going on? Because many a times, security is about finding the needle in the haystack. Today, there is so many different systems, so many things happening in the network that sometimes security products individually cannot actually point to a problem. You need to be able to correlate things, correlate a lot of data, and bring big data analytics into play at real time to be able to actually give you an ability to quickly respond and limit damage. So security intelligence is really important. This is a big area of focus for us. And the final thing is, of course, education, because security is as much about people as it is about systems and processes. So education is a very important part. And one of the big things that we as a company have begun selling to even companies is how do you bring in cyber games within the organization so that you can get your organization involved, get people more knowledgeable about phishing attacks, etc. And it is not enough to just have the higher level people in the organization actually know about it. You need to make sure that even the lower level employees, even the people who are non-technical in nature, understand that they can be a target of a cyber attack or a phishing attack. And therefore, you need to bring that education in place. So with that, I'll just conclude today's presentation. Thank you.